All right, Year 12 Global Politics. Today's video will be looking at the key aspects of terrorism. So the key aspects really are what makes the crisis unique. And here we will be looking at non-state terrorism, terrorism as an instrument of state policy, and the role of asymmetrical warfare. And the key skill here is to analyze. So when we're analyzing, it means that you need to basically understand what the key aspect means. So, what is non-state terrorism? Have an example of non-state terrorism, and then link it back. How does this actually contribute to the crisis of terrorism? So we'll start with non-state terrorism. And to give you really a definition of it, non-state terrorism are acts of violence used to achieve political and ideological aims without a link to the state. So they are not linked to a state, they are just operating independently. And non-state terrorists have thrived in globalization because they have been able to access more weapons, they can work across borders, and this has led to an increase in terrorist activity because globalization was created an interconnected world. An example of a non-state terrorist group, well, there's a few that you could talk about, but the one that we've focused on was Islamic State. Islamic State can be defined as a non-state terrorist group because they have committed acts of violence. They are trying to achieve a political or ideological aim, which is that they would like to establish an Islamic caliphate, and they don't govern a state, nor are they linked to a state. So, it's not like the Syrian government or the Iraqi government have, got control of them. So that's really an example of them. So in terms of how they contribute to terrorism, well, they are carrying out terrorist attacks. And Islamic State have been very active in their terrorist activities. They have extreme punishments, public executions, videos of beheadings and suicide bombings. So there's a lot of activity that they're carrying out that is this extreme violence. An example of an actual attack that was committed by them was in 2019. An ISIS-affiliated group, which was the ASG, killed 22 people in the Philippines. And in April 2020, they took responsibility for 52 beheadings in Mozambique. So these attacks show that ISIS are continuing to attack globally, and they are using violence to do this. And really, we have seen them grow because of globalization. They have been able to operate across borders. They've been able to establish cell groups. And, so globalization has really allowed them to grow. They have been able to contribute, these non-state terrorist groups have been able to contribute to the act of terrorism because, they are now using other platforms like the internet to terrorize, demoralize, and recruit people. In 2019, it's been reported that there were TikTok accounts that have support for them. There's been Twitter accounts, from in 2014, there was, I think 46,000 Twitter groups that were associated with ISIS. They have weaponized the internet and have used that to, recruit people and gain foreign fighters. The internet has allowed them to gain foreign fighters. And they also thrive. They thrive in ungoverned or undergoverned areas, which was why they were able to take parts of Syria because Syria was in civil war. Also, it's a challenge to even stop them from carrying out terrorist attacks and, to actually get them to stop because they aren't actually representing the state. They're unlikely to actually engage in diplomatic or humanitarian terms. Their method of communication is with violence. So in terms of how they actually contribute to the crisis of terrorism, well, it's their actions that really do it. The extreme violence that they use, their use of the internet, their extreme violence contributes to the crisis of terrorism. because they are carrying out acts that are killing people and are indiscriminately killing people. Okay, so that's one key aspect. We have a few to look at. And the next is asymmetrical warfare. So this is the way that they carry out their attack. If you've watched the previous video on challenges, you will know that that's, asymmetrical warfare can also be used as a challenge. So it's when the state organized military are exposed to unconventional forms of warfare used by terrorist organizations. So they are the opposite of conventional warfare. They involved direct military on military. It's the opposite of that. So it's more about guerrilla warfare, winning the hearts and minds. That is really what asymmetrical warfare is. Covert, it's guerrilla, and winning hearts and minds. But, covert and guerrilla, I think, are the best ways to describe it. So in terms of covert operations, I guess to go before that, why do terrorist organizations carry out these attacks? Why do they use terrorism? Well, it's because they are often fighting against a powerful force. Think about Islamic State trying to fight against, the global coalition against terrorism, or Operation Inherent Resolve. They don't have the same resources, so they have to come up with another way to defeat the enemy. So they may use hit, run, and hide tactics, where they will hide amongst the general population and continue to use these guerrilla tactics. In 2019, we saw ISIS kill 22 people in 2 suicide bombs during Sunday Mass. These attacks were to avoid capture. It was a suicide bomb, so the people that actually carried out the attack were dead. And it also then created fear. And so it was able to actually fulfill their goals, which was to, create fear and intimidate people, but also, was actually a way of them being able to attack their enemy. So yeah, that's really what they've done there. That's what they've done to do hit and run and hide tactics. In terms of winning the hearts and minds, this is really how they will try to recruit people, and they use asymmetrical warfare to do this. This is a bit of a different way to see asymmetrical warfare. Obviously we have these guerrilla tactics, the actual way that they target their enemy, but also to win people over, they have to do other things. And this may be through winning the hearts and minds, to gain more supporters. People that often join ISIS are wanting to belong. The idea of belonging is one of the Islamic State's most powerful draws to new recruiters, especially Westerners. So they will have these videos of fighters relaxing in a brotherhood. Their videos that they've got on the internet recognize that friendship, security, and a sense of belonging are powerful for their supporters. So that's how they gain sympathizers. That's how they win people over. So because I just had a blank of sympathizers, that's how they gain foreign fighters. Then during 2019, during their time in Iraq and Syria, it was estimated that between 30 to 40,000 people left their home countries to join the fight. So winning the hearts and minds is part of this asymmetrical warfare and how they actually gain extra supporters. So yeah, that's probably the main part there. It's also, in terms of how it contributes to the crisis, it's a challenge to resolve this crisis when we have these attacks that are unpredictable. You don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know when a suicide bomb is going to happen. And so that can actually create fear for people and can also, just create this unease that people have. Also, through asymmetrical warfare, it does provide propaganda for ISIS, because after these attacks, there will be media coverage, or a fighter may have filmed it. So that can then actually lead to more people wanting to join them and sympathizers. As part of asymmetrical warfare, it also shows the failure of counterterrorism, that they weren't able to identify and defend attacks. Because they couldn't, because these people are using asymmetrical warfare where they are hiding amongst the general population. So, it does make it difficult to then resolve the crisis. The final key aspect is terrorism used as an instrument of state policy. This is different to state-sponsored terrorism, because state-sponsored terrorism is when a terrorist organization is being funded by a state. Terrorism, when it's being used as an instrument of state policy, is when the state is actually using violence. So it involves violence threatened or employed against civilian targets for political objectives. So they are actually the ones carrying out the terrorist threat. So we have seen this with the Syrian regime, the Assad regime. He has used chemical weapons against the Syrian people in rebel-held zones. So Assad wants control of these areas, and in order to do so, he needs to depopulate those areas. So he needs to make life basically impossible for these people. He has targeted civilians, commerce, food supplies, hospitals, and healthcare facilities. So he is purposely attacking civilian areas. And there's been chemical attacks in 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2017. In 2013, there was a successful resolution that was about the Assad regime destroying their chemical weapons. However, that wasn't entirely successful because there have been attacks in 2014, 2015, and 2017. He has used chlorine and sarin. There's lots of different examples of those attacks. I've got here, that in Aleppo, 26 people were killed and sarin gas was used. In 2015, he used chlorine. And in 2017, sarin was used again, killing 100 people. So this contributes to the crisis of terrorism because it's a state that is carrying out the terrorist actions. And the state may not come to the actual resolution table because he himself is carrying it out for his own interests. He is doing it for a reason, and that is to depopulate a section of society. Also, we may not be able to actually resolve the issue if the UN Security Council can't actually carry out their job, which is to uphold peace and security, impose sanctions, condemn the attack. If they're not able to do that, then they're not going to be able to resolve the crisis. So that does make it a tricky crisis to resolve. But yeah, in terms of how it contributes to the crisis of terrorism, well, it's the state actually carrying out the terrorist threat, and they are the ones that are killing their people. They're not upholding peace and security. They aren't, and fulfilling, what the UN wants, but they also aren't fulfilling their role as a state, which is to protect their population. And that's concerning. So we have looked at now these three key aspects: non-state terrorism, terrorism as an instrument of state policy, and the role of asymmetrical warfare. We've looked at examples of them. We've looked at what they actually mean. And then we have also discussed why and how it actually contributes to the crisis. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you got something out of that. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks for listening, guys.